Okay, so chapter 39, physiology, homeostasis, and temperature regulation. So there's a number of problems animals must solve to survive. They have to somehow obtain energy and nutrients. They have to build and maintain internal structures, and also eliminate toxins and waste products that accumulate. They have to be able to sense and respond to their environment, and also maintain constant internal conditions. So a constant internal temperature, pH, salinity, etc. They also need to be able to reproduce. Now, each of these processes have been accomplished perfectly well by unicellular organisms, which leads one to the question, why did multicellularity evolve? Well, there are some major advantages to multicellularity. Along with those advantages, however, come some potential drawbacks, or at least challenges. So one of the things multicellularity allows you to do is get big. And this is good because now when you're bigger, you're able to prey on others. You also have increased strength to resist environmental forces like wind or water, or even just gravity. The challenge here, or why we might say this is bad, is that if you are larger, you're going to need more nutrients. And it might be tougher to get enough or to move them. Multicellularity also allows, and this is one of the big advantages, for specialization of cells. Right? If you have more than one cell, then you can have one cell type dedicated to a certain function, like reproduction, whereas another cell type might be dedicated to a different function, like digestion. So specialization is really good and a huge benefit because it increases the efficiency with which an organism does things. Being able to both to do more than one thing at once, right? So you can be sensing your environment with nervous cells while you're digesting with digestive cells, while you're making gametes with your reproductive cells, right? You have an increased efficiency. You can do more than one task at once. The drawback, or at least the challenge, is the need for coordination. Now, another big challenge is exchange with the environment. And that might seem like a weird thing to say as a challenge, but it definitely is. So, organisms must absorb nutrients and eliminate waste. And the exchange of the bringing in the nutrients and the eliminating of the waste occurs across membranes. And we have this exchange with the environment. So this also answers the question of why are cells little? And it's because the rate of exchange depends on the amount of membrane that is exposed to the environment. So the cell surface area to cell volume ratio is really, really important when it comes to exchange with the environment. So we have our surface area to volume ratio. So the larger a cell's volume is, the less relative surface area is available per unit volume, because as volume increases, the surface area does not increase proportionally. So if we had one huge honking big cell versus a little cell, we have a lot more volume to service here than we do here. So in other words, the surface area to volume ratio is much more favorable for the little cell than it would be for the big cell. So this means if you are unicellular, that's one reason you're little, right? So that you can have this larger surface area to volume ratio. Now, this need for a high ratio of surface area to volume dictates the need for multicellularity, because many small cells have a much greater surface area than one large cell for the same volume. So if you want to be big, Rather than being one big cell, you want to be many small cells, because then, in addition to the other advantages that come along with multicellularity, you have lots and lots of surface area relative to your volume. Now, you might look at this and say, but wait a minute. Not all those cells, not all those membranes I see there are actually in contact with the environment, allowing them to exchange easily with the environment. And you'd be exactly right. So how do we address that? So there's a couple different strategies if you're a multicellular animal to get the majority of your cell membrane having some kind of relationship so it can exchange nutrients and waste with the environment. So there are a couple of body plans that will serve to maximize surface area to volume ratio. And the first is a, excuse me, what we call a sac-like body plan, like this. So if you just cut it, it's literally like a sac. We've got one layer of cells on the interior and one layer of cells on the exterior, like the hydra we looked at in lab. So this means that the cells are always, every cell is always in contact with the environment, such as the water. Another type of body plan is a very, very flat body plan, like we see in the flatworms, that exposes the maximum number of cells to the environment and minimizes the cells not exposed to the environment, so that just if there's a small enough number of cells that aren't exposed, then diffusion should be sufficient, and that's what we see with some of the flatworms that we looked at. Now, what about large animals? So a really big animal, a sac-like body plan or a flat body plan, this is going to work. Can you imagine if a human being was flattened out enough so that almost all of our cells were in contact with the environment? Can you imagine how unpractical that would be? It wouldn't really work out. So there's another way to do this. And that is to have specialized tissues that have extreme branching or folding so that those tissues have a very high surface area to volume ratio. So think of something like lung tissue, or think of something like our intestinal tract, right? Think of the little papillae, the microvilli lining our intestinal tract. What does that do? It increases the surface area to volume ratio. So do all the little, you can't see them here, alveoli of our lungs. So we we also have this situation happening in our excretory system with our kidneys, where we have highly branched or folded tissues. So here are some examples of that in the kidney, in order to increase surface area to volume ratio. Now, this is great for those tissues, but what about all the other cells in our body? Well, a couple of things have to also be in place for large animals. First, you need some kind of way of transporting nutrients from these high surface area tissues and transporting waste to them. So any given cell that needs to get nutrients can somehow get those nutrients delivered, say, from the lining of the small intestine. And if it needs to get rid of waste like CO2, it can somehow deliver those to the lungs to drop off that CO2. Now that typically means we need some kind of circulatory fluid, like in humans or in many other animals, the blood. We also, in large animals, need some kind of internal environment of extracellular fluid. So we need some kind of fluid for exchange with membranes to work. So in addition to our circulatory system in animals, in large animals, right, our circulatory system, we also have something called interstitial fluid. So let's follow the pathway of oxygen and CO2. So the lungs would be an example of a tissue that is highly folded to increase surface area to volume ratio. We take in oxygen, which is essential for all of our cells to get, no matter where they are in our body. This oxygen gets picked up by our circulatory fluid, our blood. that oxygen can move from this circulatory vessel to the interstitial fluid and to each individual cell. Likewise, when these cells need to get rid of a waste, it can go the other direction. An individual cell can offload CO2 into the interstitial fluid, and then it makes its way into our circulatory system, where it then can move and make its way back out the lungs. A similar process is going to happen with nutrients we pick up and with things like nitrogenous waste we need to let out through our excretory system. So we need this circulatory system and this system with the interstitial fluid. And that's how we are able to pull off this pretty nifty trick of being big and being multicellular and still allowing our cells to exchange with the environment. Alright, so cell specialization in multicellular organisms has tremendous adaptive value. So, for example, cells that are specialized for movement don't have to also worry about capturing and processing food or producing gametes or other important things. So what we call a tissue, and that's what I want to talk about next. So within large multicellular organisms, we have specialized cells. And when we have groups of similar specialized cells working together, we call that a tissue. There are 4 main tissue types I'm going to go over: epithelial tissue, muscle tissue, connective tissue, and nervous tissue. Now, within each group, there are various specializations for different functions. I'm going to start by talking about epithelial tissue. So, epithelial tissue is the tissue that makes up linings, but there's different kinds of linings. Probably the one you're most familiar with is our outer layers of skin, what we call our epidermis. These are really important. This organ is really important because it separates the internal parts of our body from the external environment, so that's pretty critical. But we also have other types of epithelial tissue that you might not necessarily think about. So we have what's called cuboidal epithelium, because the cells kind of look like little cubes. Okay, so we would find these making up tubules or some kind of ducts, like the tubules of our kidneys, for example. They also can have secretory or absorptive function, so they might be able to absorb things or secrete things. I also wanted to mention, bouncing back here to this what we call stratified squamous epithelium. So this would be an example of our skin. So we can have what's just called simple squamous epithelium of one layer, or we can have this kind of stratified situation where we have 2 distinct layers. And we're going to dive into some of these details more in lab. We're going to look at the actual, we're going to look at some slides of actual cells, and we're going to get a little bit more into some depth of subtypes here. But for now, we're just going to talk about kind of the basic roles. We also have what's called columnar epithelium, which lines many internal organisms, many internal organs, such as the airways of the lungs and the small intestine. These are really important because they enable movements of substances between body compartments. They also can have absorptive functions and secretory functions as well. And here's just something kind of interesting to blow your mind. The epithelium lining your digestive tract is considered to be continuous with the outside of your body. Just kind of something sort of always blows my mind to think about that. And then finally we have other secretory cells. So we find these in the stomach lining, the cells that are going to secrete digestive juices or hydrochloric acid. Other secretory cells are found in salivary, sweat, or mammary glands. We also find them in things like the pancreas or the pituitary gland. So epithelial tissues play probably a much bigger role in a lot of functions in your body than just being part of your skin. Okay, so let's talk next about muscle tissue. So there are three main types of muscle tissue, and again, in lab, we're going to dive in depth to some of their subcellular structure. Here we're just going to talk about their role. So the voluntary muscle, so when you think about, I'm going to pick up this cup, and you move your arm to pick up this cup, that is a kind of muscle called skeletal muscle. This is responsible for the voluntary movements of the body that you actually are aware of doing. Another type of muscle called cardiac muscle, you probably guessed, is a type of involuntary muscle responsible for the contractions of the heart. So we don't have to think about doing this, it just does it, and that's really good because I'm very forgetful, and if I had to think about making my heart beat, I would have been dead a very long time ago. Another type of involuntary muscle is known as smooth muscle. So this provides the ability to move for organs that are not under our conscious control, so things like your digestive tract, or this is what will dilate or dilate the diameter, change the diameter of your blood vessels, things like that. So let's talk about connective tissues next, which is probably the most varied of the tissues, in that it's the most different sort of most different looking types of cells going on here. So connective tissues would include things like ligaments and tendons, structures that literally connect bones to bones or muscles to bones. These are going to be made of largely of collagen fibers, and I can't find my little circly pen. Oh, there it is on the ground. Largely made of collagen fibers with cells embedded in them, and we'll talk about that in lab a little more and look at some examples. But other things that are considered connective tissue include bone. So bone is basically, we have layers of bone cells in a mineralized, hardened matrix, and these bones provide support structures for the body that make it possible for muscles to generate movements. It gives them something to act against. Adipose is another kind of connective tissue. This is fat. So there's two types of tissue. Most of the tissue we have is called white fat, which primarily cushions and supports our internal organs. There's also something called brown fat that it gets that brown color because it has a very large number of mitochondria that instead of producing ATPs are producing heat. And so adults have only a very little bit of brown fat, but infants have a higher proportion of brown fat because of their need to generate heat is greater. Blood is also a connective tissue. So depending on what kind of blood cell you are, you have a slightly different role. If you are a red blood cell, your job is to carry respiratory gases like oxygen. If you are a white blood cell, you have the function of protecting against foreign substances or microorganisms. So you have important immune system jobs to do. And then our final kind of tissue we're going to talk about is nervous tissue, which is really important in processing information. So there are a few different types of players going on here. So we have the actual neurons, which, as you can see, are highly specialized cells. I mean, look at the shape of this thing compared to, like a cheek cell or something. So the neurons have the job of communicating information from the various sensors in our body to our central nervous system. So a sensor, an example of a sensor, let me erase this. So the cells of our retina in our eyes can sense light. They're one of our sensors. So they encode this information about the external environment. Our neurons are able to communicate this information from those sensor cells to our central nervous system. Another important player in our nervous tissue is our glia cells. So the glia cells are going to support our neurons and also act as immune cells for the central nervous system. And interestingly, there's actually a lot of research right now into the function of glial cells, and they're finding they may have a more important job in actually transmitting information than we have previously appreciated. So I would expect that soon you'll see more information about that. So it's kind of an interesting thing. All right, so different tissues work together to form an organ. And most organs you'll find all 4 tissue types. So let's take as an example something like our intestine. So our intestines have a lining of epithelial cells, a layer of connective tissue called the mucosa, which includes both blood vessels, which would carry blood, another kind of connective tissue. It would include, we also have neurons, part of our nervous tissue, and layers of smooth muscle. So we have all 4 types of tissues within that organ. Individual organs are part of a larger organ system, which is a group of organs that work together to do a job. So an example would be the digestive system, right? In the digestive system, the intestines are just one organ among many that have this job of food processing, and also included in the digestive system would be the mouth, the pharynx, esophagus, liver, pancreas, anus, lots of other things. Similarly, we have a circulatory system that includes more than one component, and a respiratory system that includes more than one component. So the organizational hierarchy that you should be familiar with, so we talked about a multicellular organism. First we have cells, and many of these cells are specialized. Groups of cells working together form a tissue, such as epithelial tissue, nervous tissue, muscle tissue or connective tissue. Multiple tissues working together form an organ, like the small intestine. Multiple organs can work together to form an organ system, like the digestive system. And then taken together, all these different organ systems form our multicellular organism. So I'm going to stop this video here. We'll take a break and we'll pick up, and we're going to talk about, when we come back, so we have these different organ systems and different tissues. How the heck do we coordinate all this together? So that's what we're going to talk about when we come back.